everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Steph and today we're going to chat about books with disability rep. So I was really consciously making an effort this year in my reading to seek out romance books that feature disabled characters, preferably characters who are the main characters. We get to know them as a person, not just as a person with this disability. We get to see beyond their disability what kind of things make them tick and what kind of things make them feel vulnerable, and how can we develop them and help them find their purpose and their best happily ever after and all that good stuff you'd want for any character of any ability. I thought about making a list of all the disability books I read this year, which would be about double of the books I'm going to chat with you today about, but I didn't love all the books that I read with disability rep. So I decided to remove the ones I didn't love, because ultimately I want you to find books with good disability rep. If you're watching this video, I assume you're at least interested in getting to know about them. So that's what you're going to see here in today's video. I have made other videos, which I'll link down below, for books with epilepsy, books with hearing loss or blindness, and I've started to build that playlist, and I will put that link there as well in the description below. But I would love to hear if you've read any of these books, or if you have any books you want to add to this list. There are a few authors like Sarah M. Eden who write tons of books with disability rep. She has her Jonquil series, her Lancaster family series, and she kind of sprinkles it throughout her westerns as well. She has some fantastic disability rep, and she herself has a disability, so she talks about that, and she's a really cool author to follow as well as get to know through her books. So in addition to her books, there are lots of books I'm going to chat with you about today. So if you like this video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe to my channel, and I am going to be chatting more about disability reps on this channel in the future, so I look forward to sharing that with you. I've talked about this book before on my channel, so I won't spend too much time on it. The Match by Sarah Adams. This features a main character who works with guide dogs and trains them and helps others to learn how to work with their guide dogs. And she herself, the main character, is epileptic, so we get to see how she works with families who need guide dogs for various reasons to help them in order to be more independent. And we get to see her work with the family of a single dad and his young daughter who is epileptic, and try to give her some more independence as she's moving into that transition from childhood to teenager, and try to help her to feel more confident in herself and going about the world. So really, really fantastic book. Emma St. Clair wrote the Love Cliché series, which I've also talked about before, but the fourth one in the series, or fifth one in the series, these are rom-coms. This is Falling for Your Best Friend. Has to do with Harper, who is autistic, and kind of figuring that out as the book goes along, and talks about self-identifying with that and whether or not she wants to officially get labeled through a doctor with that diagnosis, and how she is figuring out what a romantic relationship would look like for her, knowing her sensitivities to, being touched by someone or being held by somebody, things like that. This is still closed door. It's nothing too graphic or detailed, but it does talk about those transitions and expectations for what your life can look like moving on as an independent adult, and possibly, forming a serious relationship with someone. So it's really, really well done. As always, Sarah Eden's books are really great with talking about disability rep. A few that I read or reread this year are Love Remains, which features blindness. We have Friends and Foes, which is a physical disability, mobility aid. Long Journey Home talks about a respiratory disease. Well, there's also Healing Hearts, which has epilepsy in it as well. And they're fantastic stories. Really, really well done. Great character development. Moving on, if you watched my 21 books that I wanted to read in 2021 video, I'll put that link down below. This one was talked about. Silence Between Us was one that I wanted to read this year. It's fantastic young adult story with a deaf main character, and talking about the way she's going about the world and how she's starting to receive attention of a romantic nature from an able-bodied student in her class, and how the two interact, how they can consider pursuing a romantic relationship moving forward, and what that would look like for them. There are a couple on this list that actually feature diabetes, so I'm going to talk about two of them on this list. The first one is The Neighbor War. Now, that's not revealed right away, so it's a slight spoiler, but it really just explains how it affects her confidence and the way that she goes about the world and possibly pursuing a relationship. So we get to see a really, really great enemies to lovers story here. Katie Bailey also wrote The Roommate Agreement, which came before this in the series. It's a duology. They're both fantastic, and she's such a talented writer, so I can't recommend these books enough, but they're really great diabetes rep in there. Secondly, we have The Mistletoe Motive, which I just read recently. The main male character is diabetic, and our main female character is autistic, so there's some really great representation there as well. Next up, we have another young adult book. This is a duology. We have Brave Enough and Finding Balance. Both of these talk about teenagers who have overcome childhood cancer and moving forward from them. Some of the characters, in addition to the main characters, are missing limbs, are childhood cancer survivors, and how that affects their life now. We also see mobility aids in this story. Do they want a prosthetic? Do they not want a prosthetic? So we get to see some really interesting conversations take place and some very open and honest discussions about accessibility in school, in work, as they pursue jobs and things of that nature. So really, really great discussions and great topics. A heads up about Brave Enough, possible trigger warning, this does talk about drug abuse, the using drugs as a coping mechanism for the hardships and trauma from the past. So that affects one of the main characters in Brave Enough, and it does move on. I personally don't like to linger on stories that are just heavy all the time, and I don't feel like either of these books were too heavy for me to read as a romance lover. They have a bit of real life, but they also have some really great moments and great disability rep. Another thing that I noticed this year was discovering more books that talk about infertility for whatever medical condition they might have. It talks about how that affects their lives, and I really love that we get to see that a little bit more. This is like real life. People have to deal with that in real life. It's nice to see that representation on the page. Christmas in Love was one that I just read recently, and it was fantastic rep, and it's, I think, a novella, so I think it's short, but it also has really quality character development and great representation of, you know, what that's like and what that prognosis means for someone who's considering a marriage and, you know, their hopes for a family and what that looks like for them. So I thought that was really, really well done. We also have a teeny bit of that represented, although we don't find out till maybe halfway through the book, so slight spoiler if you want to skip like 10 seconds, is The Most Sabrina McCoy. It's fantastic, fantastic book. Thoroughly enjoyed it, but we also get to see infertility talked about in that and how that affects when they're looking at their future, their expectations for their life. So really, really great representation from both these books. Next up, we have Love and Lavender. This is by Josie Kilpack. This is one of the very, very few historical romance books that features a character with autism. So I thought it was really great to read that rep, how this relationship is developed between our main characters, and get to see what that looks like for them, how the romance develops and how they get to learn about one another in that way. It wasn't my favorite ever representation of autism, but I thought it was a really, really great kind of glimpse into history and what that might have been like for someone from, I think this is Regency era, to go about the world with autism and not always be understood. So I thought that was really a great kind of window into what that must have been like for someone in the past. Next up, we have Love Notes. This is a story by Stacey Hart. She's an indie author that I've started to read more of her backlist, and I really enjoy her character development, and the way she writes is just so well done. And this story is loosely based off of Marianne from Sense and Sensibility. So our main female character, Annie, is a piano player. She's very emotional, but she's also young. She's, I want to say, just graduated from high school, so we have a bit of an age gap romance in the story. Think of Marianne and Colonel Brandon from Sense and Sensibility. So he's a little bit older than her, and we get to see how she just goes through the world with wearing her heart on her sleeve and also dealing with this heart condition that she has. And it affects her breathing, her mobility, you know, her energy levels at times, and we get to see honest conversations about surgeries and things of that nature and scars. It does have a little bit at the end of like, we're fixed, you have no problems anymore, which I was kind of just a teensy bit let down by, because in real life most disabilities don't just go away, right? They they in some capacity are with that person for their entire life. So I don't remember at the end if she has like a lingering thing. She just has to get checked up every so often, but she does need medical intervention during the story, and we do get to see how that affects her life for a long portion of the story. This, I believe, has one open door scene towards the very end of the book, but really, really great story, great development, and it just like made my heart all gooey in so many spots. It was really sweet. Alright, so the last few books on this list feature open door romance scenes, so they're easily skippable if you don't want to read them, but also some really great representation I want to chat with you about. So the first one is Life's Too Short. This one caught me by surprise. It had so much depth to it. This is about a main character who is like a YouTuber sensation, very popular, and she meets this guy as their relationship starts to develop. What she's very conscious of in her life is that her mom had ALS, and she has, I believe, been afraid to get diagnosed, but just kind of wants to live life every day to the fullest. And this guy is like a workaholic who doesn't really know how to be in the present here and now because he's so fixated on the schedules and everything has to, be in place and where do I have to go next. And we get to see how these two personalities kind of mellow each other out, like an opposites attract kind of thing. But I really, really love the themes of, focusing on the here and now, making the most of small moments in the day, really appreciating the beauty of small moments. Those are just themes I really liked. And also talking very realistically about what ALS looks like, what expectations are for her life, knowing what her mom went through and seeing that. And I think her sister had ALS as well. So we get to see how it affects your mentality and your expectations for your life. So I thought it was a really, really great representation, as well as this are a great romance. Next up we have two books. These do include steamy moments that you can fast forward through if that's not your thing. But we have Get a Life, Chloe Brown, which features a character with fibromyalgia. I just did a reread of this and really just love the way they talk about like energy levels and expectations for as you get older and pain management. The way the representation is on the page is just fantastic. And book 3 about Eve Brown is about a gentleman who is autistic, and we get to see Eve is kind of slowly figuring out through the story maybe she's autistic as well. So she's kind of learning about herself and learning, the ways that she expresses her autism and the things that she needs in order to be understood and supported by her family. So I thought those were really well done representation of what it looks like for those kinds of characters and those kinds of disabilities or things that make them different and make them different in the way they interact with the world. Okay, I had to move because my foot fell asleep. I picked this book up because of the hearing loss rep. If there's a character who's deaf, I'm going to pick up that book because I want to see how it's represented on the page. And for this one, Only When It's Us, the author actually did a slight rewrite of her story. So I think I read the updated version of it. But this is about two college students, one of whom is deaf, and the girl starts talking to him thinking that he's ignoring her, that he's kind of too full of himself to bother answering her, and instead he can't hear her. That affects the way that their relationship begins. It kind of gets them off to a wrong footing initially, and then we get to see how these two learn about each other and figure out how to work with one another. He gets cochlear implants, so we see how that changes their relationship. Cochlear implants? Hearing aids. I think cochlear implants. So we get to see how that impacts their relationship, how it affects the way that he communicates with his family and how he communicates with others. He's very closed off at the beginning of the story. He was not always deaf. He had an injury that caused him to be deaf. So we see how that impacts his life and his expectations of what his future would look like. I really liked the representation. I didn't love the pacing of the story. I felt like it just went on forever and ever. But the representation was really cool to read about, and I thought there were some great scenes in the book that depicted that. Last but not least, we have The Heart Principle. This is an autistic representation. The author said this book was based off of a lot of her own life experiences because she also is autistic. I thought it was really interesting to talk about masking in this book. Someone who is putting on a mask to the world to look like they're all together and to pretend like they're an able-bodied person, and that is exhausting when you are not an able-bodied person. You can't keep that up forever. And so we get to see how she's kind of burning out from that and how that deteriorates her mental health a bit. It does end with a happily ever after. It's just a really rough road to get there. He's a really awesome guy. Really all she needs is somebody who's going to support her and not try to change her, and that's exactly what he does. He has her back and lets her work out her issues, and the rep was really great. It was a little tough to read, especially on the mental health side. I was kind of wondering if this was going to go into self-harm, and I think it might have been hinted at briefly, but it doesn't stay in that area for too long. So that was something I just had to keep getting through in order to get to the happily ever after, which was there, but it was really hard to get there and to read that story and just to be with her in that place when she was so down. So this story talks about a lot of heavy things, talks about grief, talks about like lack of emotional support from family, just not understanding what she needs, and her being in a rut with her own career, and also trying to balance out autism with romance and how she's trying to figure a lot of things out. A really great autism rep, just not my favorite in this series. So that wraps up this list. If you have read any of these books, by all means, please let me know in the comments. If you've gotten this far, how about you leave a star emoji if you have gotten this far? And let me know if there are any books with disability rep that you are keeping your eye on or have read this year. I'd love to hear about them and maybe add them to my TBR for next year. Thanks so much for watching, and if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to my channel for more fun content like this. Thanks so much. Have a great day, everybody.